The lighthouse door was standing open when they found the diary. It shouldn't have been there. Nobody had entered that place in 15 years, not since the night Emma Harlowe disappeared. But there it was, sitting on the dusty table, opened to the last page, with fresh ink forming words that nobody could explain. The handwriting was hers. Everyone recognized it. But Emma was 17 when she vanished, and that date, written at the top of the page, was from yesterday. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the summer of 1993, when things still made sense, when Clearwater Point was just a forgotten town on the coast of Maine, where nothing extraordinary ever happened. One of those towns where everybody knows everybody, where every family name is carved into the cemetery stones going back 200 years. The kind of place where the biggest excitement was Friday night football and the annual lobster festival. The lighthouse had been automated for decades, but people still called old Thomas Harlowe the lighthouse keeper. It was in his blood, he'd say. His father kept that light, and his grandfather before him. Even though computers did the work now, Thomas made the walk up those iron stairs every single day, checking things that didn't need checking, keeping watch over waters that didn't need watching. His daughter Emma was the kind of girl who seemed to glow from within. Not popular in that plastic, cheerleader way, but magnetic in something deeper. She had her father's love for the sea and her mother's artistic soul. Sarah, her mother, had died when Emma was 12, and something in both father and daughter had gone quiet after that. Not broken, just muted, like someone had turned down the volume on their lives. Emma spent her days painting watercolors of the coastline, reading poetry on the rocks, and helping her father with whatever he needed at the lighthouse. She had this habit of talking to herself, or so people thought. Later, some would remember seeing her lips moving, having full conversations with the empty air beside her, smiling at jokes nobody else could hear. It was July 23rd when things started feeling wrong. The summer had been strange that year, too quiet. The seagulls that usually screamed and fought over scraps near the docks had gone silent weeks before, just floating on the water like plastic toys, watching. The fog rolled in thicker than anyone could remember, sometimes not burning off until afternoon, sometimes not burning off at all. Old fishermen, the ones who'd worked those waters for 50 years, started coming back early, their faces pale, refusing to explain why. When pressed, they'd just shake their heads and say the water felt different, felt wrong, felt like it was watching them back. Emma had been acting strange too, her father would later tell the police. She'd always been a quiet girl, but in those final weeks, she became distant in a way that worried him. She'd stand at the lighthouse windows for hours, staring out at the fog, not painting, not reading, just watching. When he'd ask what she was looking at, she'd smile that sad smile and say she was waiting. Waiting for what, he'd ask. She never answered. Just that smile, and then she'd go back to watching. She stopped eating much, started sleeping during the day and staying awake all night. He'd hear her footsteps on the stairs, climbing up to the light room at 2, 3 in the morning. When he'd follow her up, she'd be standing at the glass, her breath fogging the windows, drawing symbols he didn't recognize in the condensation. The night she disappeared was ordinary in every way that mattered. Thomas made dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, Emma's favorite since she was little. She barely touched it, pushed the food around her plate while staring past him, through him, at something he couldn't see. He asked if she was feeling all right. She said yes. Asked if something was bothering her. She said no. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks, and her eyes were so sad and so old that it frightened him. She said, "I love you, Dad. I want you to remember that. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, I love you." He should have known then, should have grabbed her, held her, demanded answers. But you never think it's the last time. You never think tonight is the night your world ends. Around 10 o'clock, Emma said she was going up to the lighthouse. She did this often, so Thomas didn't think anything of it. She kissed his cheek, another thing that should have been a warning, because she hadn't done that in years, and she walked out into the fog. He watched her go from the kitchen window of their small cottage, watched her figure dissolve into that thick, grey nothing, and that was the last time he saw his daughter. He gave her an hour, then started to worry, gave her another 30 minutes, then grabbed his flashlight and went after her. The fog was so thick he could barely see his hand in front of his face. The beam from his flashlight just reflected back at him, turning the world into a wall of white. He called her name, over and over. Emma, Emma, sweetheart. The fog swallowed his voice like it was hungry for it. The lighthouse door was open. The light was on, spinning, sending its beam out into the emptiness. But Emma wasn't there. Her jacket was draped over the back of the chair where she always sat. Her shoes were placed neatly side by side near the door like she'd just stepped out of them and meant to come right back. But no Emma. Thomas searched every inch of that lighthouse, every stair, every corner, every shadow. Nothing. He ran back down, slipping on the iron steps in his panic, and called the police. Sheriff McKenna arrived within 20 minutes with 4 deputies. They searched all night, brought in search dogs at dawn. The dogs tracked Emma's scent to the lighthouse, up the stairs, to that chair where her jacket hung. And then nothing. The dogs circled and whined and refused to go further, like the scent just ended, like she'd evaporated. The town turned out to search. Hundreds of people combing the coastline, the woods, the beaches. They searched for 3 days straight, found nothing, no body, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. It was like Emma had simply ceased to exist. The FBI got involved after the first week. They interviewed everyone, her friends, her teachers, kids from school, the regulars at the diner, the fishermen who worked the docks. Nobody knew anything. Everyone loved Emma. She had no enemies, no secret boyfriend, no reason to run away. The investigation dragged on for months, then years, then quietly faded into the cold case files. Thomas aged 20 years in that first year after she vanished. He stopped maintaining the lighthouse, stopped leaving the cottage except to buy food. People would see him sometimes, standing at his window, staring out at the lighthouse, waiting for a daughter who was never coming home. But here's where it gets strange. About 3 months after Emma disappeared, the letters started arriving. Not at the Harlow cottage, at the lighthouse. Someone somehow was leaving letters inside the locked lighthouse addressed to Emma Harlow. Thomas would go up there once a week, forcing himself to check on things, and he'd find them. Plain white. Envelopes, no postage, no return address, just her name in neat handwriting. The first time it happened, he tore the envelope open with shaking hands. Inside was a single sentence. "We're waiting for you, that's all." He brought it to the police. They dusted for prints, found nothing. Checked the lighthouse for signs of forced entry. Found nothing. Changed the locks. The letters kept coming. Once a week, like clockwork, a new letter would appear, always the same message. "We're waiting for you." Sheriff McKenna set up cameras. The cameras malfunctioned every time, showing nothing but static, or they'd simply turn off for an hour and turn back on, and there would be a new letter. They posted a deputy to watch the lighthouse. The deputy swore nobody came or went, but the letters appeared anyway. After 6 months, they gave up trying to explain it. Thomas kept every letter, put them in a shoebox in his closet. 2 years. After Emma disappeared, he had 104 letters, all saying the same thing. "We're waiting for you." He stopped opening them, couldn't bear to see those words again, but he kept collecting them, kept finding them in the lighthouse, kept adding them to the box. Some people in town thought Thomas was writing the letters himself, that grief had broken something in his mind. Others thought it was a cruel prank, though nobody could figure out how. The most superstitious folks, the old-timers who still believed in things that couldn't be explained, they said the lighthouse was haunted. said it had always been haunted, going back generations. Said there were things in the fog that took people sometimes, and those people were never really gone, just somewhere else, somewhere close. The rational people laughed at that, right up until other things started happening. 5 years after Emma vanished, a girl named Rachel Morrison went missing. She was 16, new to town, didn't know Emma or the Harlows. She'd moved to Clearwater Point with her family that spring when her father took a job at the Marine Research Station. Rachel was a loner, an outsider, exactly the kind of kid who might run away. But the way she disappeared was identical to Emma. Last seen walking toward the lighthouse in the fog, jacket left behind, shoes neatly placed, scent trail ending like she'd been erased from existence. The letters started appearing for her too. Same handwriting, same message. "We're waiting for you." The town started to panic then. 2 girls, same age, same pattern, 5 years apart. The FBI came back. National media showed up. Clearwater Point was on the news. Theories flew everywhere. Serial killer, cult, human trafficking, runaways, mass hysteria. Nothing stuck. No evidence. No leads, no bodies. Just 2 girls who walked into the fog and never walked back out. Then Rachel's mother started claiming she could hear her daughter's voice. Late at night, when the fog rolled in, she'd hear Rachel calling to her from somewhere outside. "Mama, help me. I'm so cold." She'd run out into the fog, screaming Rachel's name, searching until her husband dragged her back inside. The other parents in town thought she was losing her mind, until more people started hearing voices, always in the fog, always familiar. Dead relatives, lost children, old friends, calling out, asking for help, asking to be found. The voices became so common that people stopped talking about them. Like if they didn't acknowledge it, it would stop being real. The fog itself seemed to be getting worse. Rolling in earlier, staying later, getting thicker. By the 7th year after Emma's disappearance, there were days when the fog never lifted at all. When Clearwater Point was wrapped in grey from sunrise to sunset. Trapped in a bubble of white nothing, Thomas Harlow stopped leaving his cottage entirely. People would bring him groceries, leave them on his porch. He looked like a ghost himself by then, thin and grey and hollow-eyed. He stopped collecting the letters from the lighthouse. Let them pile up inside. The only person he'd talk to was Sheriff McKenna, and even then, just barely. McKenna would check on him once a week, sit in his kitchen drinking coffee Thomas didn't touch, trying to get him to eat something, to say something. Thomas would just stare out the window at the lighthouse and shake his head. Sometimes he'd whisper things McKenna couldn't quite hear, things about the fog, things about voices, things about how Emma had known, how she'd tried to tell him, but he hadn't understood, how she'd been saying goodbye that last night, and he'd been too blind to see it. Year 8 brought another disappearance. A boy this time. Marcus Webb, 17, captain of the football team, scholarship to Boston College already signed. He had everything to live for. But one Friday night in October, he told his girlfriend he was going for a drive to clear his head. His truck was found the next morning in the lighthouse parking lot. Door open, keys in the ignition, engine cold. His jacket was in the lighthouse, his shoes by the door, and the letters started coming for him too. "We're waiting for you." The pattern was undeniable now. Every 2 to 3 years, someone vanished. Always a teenager, always the lighthouse. Always the fog, always the letters. The town was dying. Families were moving away. Businesses were closing. The high school that had once had 300 students was down to 70. Nobody wanted to stay in a place where children disappeared into thin air. But some people couldn't leave. Thomas couldn't leave. Rachel's parents couldn't leave. Marcus's mother refused to abandon the town where her son had last been. They waited, and the fog kept rolling in. By year 10, Clearwater Point was a ghost town with living people. The diner stayed open, but only because the owner had nowhere else to go. The church held services for a congregation of 15. The elementary school closed. Kids were bused to the next town over. The lighthouse stood like a monument to something nobody understood, its light spinning every night, cutting through fog that seemed to pulse with its own dark life. Sheriff McKenna was the only law enforcement left. His deputies had all transferred away. He could have too, probably should have, but something kept him there. Guilt maybe. The feeling that if he just stayed, if he just kept watching, he might figure it out. Might save the next one. He started sleeping in his office, afraid to go home, afraid to close his eyes for too long. He covered his walls with maps, timelines, photographs, red string connecting dots that didn't want to be connected. He was obsessed. Everyone could see it. His wife left him. His friends stopped calling. But he kept digging, kept searching for the pattern within the pattern, and then, on a cold November night in year 11, Sheriff McKenna figured something out. It was 3 a.m, and he was staring at his wall of evidence for the 1,000th time when he saw it. The dates. The disappearances always happened when the moon was dark. New moon, no moon in the sky. And they always happened within 3 days of the anniversary of the lighthouse being built. November 18th, 1823. He checked the records. Emma vanished on November 20th. Rachel on November 19th. Marcus on November 17th. Every single disappearance clustered around those dates. But why? What was special about the lighthouse? He started digging into its history, found old newspaper articles, ships that had wrecked on the rocks before the lighthouse was built. 47 people drowned in a single storm on November 18th, 1822. The lighthouse was built exactly 1 year later, dedicated to their memory. A light to guide the lost home. That's what the dedication plaque said. A light to guide the lost home. McKenna felt something cold settle in his stomach. The lost, the fog, the voices, the letters. What if it wasn't a kidnapper? What if it wasn't anything human at all? What if the lighthouse was doing exactly what it was built to do, guiding the lost home, but not the living, the dead, or something in between? He knew how it sounded, knew he'd lost his mind if he said it out loud. But deep down, in that place where instinct lives, he knew he was right. The lighthouse was a doorway, and every few years, when the conditions were right, when the veil was thin enough, something reached through and took someone. Took them somewhere else, somewhere the fog led. He sat in his office, surrounded by evidence that suddenly made a terrible kind of sense, and he made a decision. He was going to the lighthouse. He was going to wait for the next new moon. And he was going to see what happened. November 17th arrived wrapped in fog, so thick it felt solid. McKenna was already at the lighthouse by sunset, armed with cameras, recording equipment, his service weapon, and a determination that bordered on madness. He checked every inch of the structure, locked every door behind him, climbed to the light room and settled in to wait. The light spun above him, steady and eternal. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like it was trying to get in. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Midnight came and went. McKenna's eyes burned from staring into the fog, but he didn't look away. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then at exactly 3:14 in the morning, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. One moment it was cold. The next, McKenna could see his breath crystallizing in the air. The light above him flickered once, twice. The fog outside began to move, swirling in patterns that defied the wind. And McKenna heard it, a voice, calling from somewhere beyond the glass. "Sheriff, Sheriff, can you hear me?" It was Emma Harlow's voice. He was sure of it. He stood, legs shaking, and moved to the window. The fog was thick as cotton, but in it he could see shapes, figures moving closer. "Emma," he called out. "Emma, where are you?" The figure in the fog stopped, paused, and then it turned. McKenna saw a face through the white. Emma's face, but wrong. Not older, not younger, just wrong. Her eyes were too dark, her smile too wide. Her mouth moved. "Come home, Sheriff. We're all waiting." The light above him went out. Complete darkness, complete silence. And then something knocked on the glass. 3 slow knocks, deliberate, patient. McKenna stumbled backward, fumbling for his flashlight, his camera, his gun. When he finally got the flashlight on, the fog was gone. The lighthouse light was spinning normally again. The temperature was normal, like nothing had happened. But on the glass, written in condensation from the outside, were words. Soon, very soon. McKenna didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. Couldn't. Who would believe him? He told himself it was exhaustion, stress, his mind playing tricks. But he knew better. He stopped going to the lighthouse, stopped investigating, went through the motions of his job like a man sleepwalking. People noticed but didn't ask. Everyone in Clearwater Point had learned not to ask too many questions. The fog rolled in thicker than ever that winter. Some days it was like living inside a cloud. You couldn't see across the street, couldn't see your own front yard. Children stopped playing outside. People stopped driving unless absolutely necessary. The town held its breath, waiting for the next disappearance, waiting to see whose child would walk into the fog and never return. But months passed and nobody vanished. Spring came and the fog thinned. Summer arrived and almost felt normal. People started to relax, started to hope that maybe somehow it was over. Maybe the cycle had broken. McKenna knew better but said nothing. He could feel it building, like pressure before a storm, like the pause before lightning strikes. Something was coming, something bigger than before. He started having dreams. Every night the same dream. He was standing in the lighthouse. The light was out. Emma was there, and Rachel and Marcus and others he didn't recognize. Dozens of them, all standing in a circle staring at him. They didn't speak, but he could hear them anyway. Soon, they said without saying, soon we can all come home. He'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, the word home echoing in his skull. It was Thomas Harlow who broke the waiting. After 13 years of silence, of living like a ghost in his cottage, he walked into McKenna's office on a bright July morning and said, "I know where Emma is. I know where they all are." McKenna looked at the old man, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Thomas looked younger somehow, healthier, like some weight had lifted. Or like he'd made peace with something terrible. "Where, Thomas?" McKenna asked. Thomas smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who'd seen the edge of the world and stepped over it. "In the fog," Thomas said. "They've always been in the fog. They're not dead. They're not alive. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" McKenna asked, though he already knew. "For all of us," Thomas said. "The lighthouse is calling them home, but it needs more. It's always needed more. One at a time wasn't enough. It wants everyone, the whole town." That's what Emma understood at the end. That's why she went willingly. She thought she could stop it. Thought if she went it would be enough. But it's never enough. It's hungry. It's been hungry since the day it was built. McKenna listened as Thomas explained it all. The research he'd done over the years. The old stories he'd uncovered. The lighthouse was built on a place that had always been wrong. Long before the colonists arrived, the native tribes avoided that spit of land, called it the place where the worlds touch, said that on certain nights, when the stars were right and the moon was dark, you could cross over. The colonists didn't listen, built the lighthouse anyway, thought they were helping, thought they were bringing light to darkness, but they got it backwards. They opened a door, and everything that had been waiting on the other side finally had a way through. The shipwreck victims in 1822, they didn't drown. Not really. They crossed over, and the lighthouse, built in their memory, made sure that door never fully closed. Every few years, when the alignment was right, something from the other side could reach through and pull someone across. Payment, offering, food, whatever word made sense. The missing kids weren't kidnapped. They were collected. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. An old revolver. McKenna's hand went to his own weapon, but Thomas shook his head. "This isn't for you, Sheriff. This is for me. I'm tired. I've been waiting 13 years to understand. Now I understand. And I'm going to her. I'm going to Emma, and I'm going to close that door." McKenna tried to stop him, tried to talk him down, but Thomas was already backing toward the door. "Don't follow me," he said. "Don't let anyone follow me. Let me do this." And he walked out into a day so clear and bright that it hurt to look at. McKenna watched him go, watched him walk down the street toward the lighthouse. And he did nothing, couldn't move, couldn't speak, just watched as Thomas Harlow disappeared into the distance. They found Thomas 3 days later, in the lighthouse, sitting in Emma's chair. The gun was on the floor beside him, unfired. He looked peaceful, almost happy, but he was cold. Dead for at least 48 hours, the coroner said. Heart failure. Natural causes, if you could call anything natural in Clearwater Point. But here's the thing. Next to Thomas on the table was a stack of letters. Hundreds of them. All the letters that had been appearing for 13 years. And they were all opened. Every single one. And every single one said the same thing. We're waiting for you. Except the last one. The one on top. That one was different. That one said he's home now. Thank you for waiting. After Thomas died, the disappearances stopped. Completely. No more missing kids. No more letters appearing in locked rooms. The fog started to lift. Slowly over months it began to thin. By the next spring, Clearwater Point had clear skies more often than not. People started to move back. Cautiously at first, then in a trickle, then a flood. The town came back to life. New families, new businesses, new children playing in streets that had been empty for years. It was like waking from a nightmare. McKenna stayed on as sheriff, though he never talked about what had happened. Retired the case files, sealed the records, let people forget. Let them believe it had been something normal, something explainable. It was better that way, but McKenna never forgot. And sometimes on foggy nights, he'd drive out to the lighthouse. It was automated, had been the whole time, still worked just fine. He'd sit in his car and watch the lights spin. And sometimes, just sometimes, he'd see figures in the fog, standing at the windows. Watching back, Emma was there. He knew her silhouette, Thomas beside her, Rachel and Marcus and all the others who'd walked into the fog and never returned. They weren't suffering, weren't calling for help, just standing there waiting for what he never knew. Maybe they were gods, maybe they were prisoners, maybe they were something else entirely, something that didn't have a word in any human language. The lighthouse still stands today, still operational, still guiding ships safely around the rocks. Tourists come now, taking pictures, buying postcards, eating ice cream at the new shops in town. Nobody tells them the stories. Nobody wants to remember. But sometimes, late at night, when the moon is dark and the fog rolls in thick, you can see lights in the lighthouse windows. Lights that shouldn't be there. And if you listen carefully, very carefully, you might hear voices carried on the wind. Not crying, not screaming, just calling gently, patiently, come home, come home. We're all waiting. The diary they found, the one that started this story, the one with Emma's handwriting and yesterday's date. It disappeared from the evidence room 3 days after it was logged. Just vanished, like it had never existed. But McKenna remembered what it said. He'd read it before it disappeared. Read every word. It was Emma's handwriting, all right. But the words made no sense. They were in a language that looked like English, but wasn't quite right. The letters were familiar, but arranged in ways that hurt to read, like looking at something through water. The only part he could understand was the last line. It was in plain English, clear as day. Thank you for remembering us. We remember you too. And we'll be here when it's your turn to come home. McKenna is an old man now, retired, lives in a small house on the edge of town, as far from the lighthouse as he can get without leaving Clearwater Point entirely. He tells himself he could leave, could move somewhere warm and dry and far from the ocean, somewhere the fog never reaches. But he knows the truth. He's waiting, just like everyone else who stayed. Waiting for that night when the moon is dark and the fog rolls in thick and something knocks 3 times on his door. And when that night comes, when he hears those 3 slow, deliberate knocks, he knows exactly what he'll do. He'll put on his jacket, he'll step into his shoes, and he'll walk out into the fog, not because he has to, but because after all these years, after all this waiting, he's curious, needs to know, needs to see what's on the other side of that door. Where Emma went, where Thomas followed, where all the lost ones go. The lighthouse is still there, still spinning, still calling. And one day, maybe soon, maybe not for years yet, Sheriff McKenna will answer that call. We'll walk toward that light, and when he does, if you're standing on the shore watching, you might see him pause at the door, might see him turn and look back one last time at the world he's leaving behind. And you might see him smile, not a sad smile, not a frightened smile, just a smile of recognition, of understanding, of a man who finally knows where he's going. And then he'll step inside, and the door will close, and the fog will swallow him whole. And somewhere, in a place that has no name, Emma Harlow will take her father's hand and they'll walk together into whatever comes next. And in the lighthouse on the table, a new letter will appear, written in fresh ink that smells like salt water and storms. And it will say, like all the others, like it always has, like it always will, we're waiting for you.